Today I'm going to show you how to build Forge World Necron Acanthrites with a little conversion. It's coming right up.
Necrons!
Nick speaking, and welcome to this video. And if you're new to the channel and you want to learn about Necrons and more, then please subscribe and hit the bell button to turn on all notifications so you don't miss an upload. Okay, so we're just about to go table down and have a look at me building these Forge World Acanthrites. Now I have done a small conversion to these models, however I think the small conversion has had big results on the models. I think they look a lot better. However, I would love to know what you think of the conversion. So once you've watched the video, then let me know in the comments box below. Right, let's get on with building these Acanthrites. Okay, so here is our bag of Acanthrites from Forge World. Now there's a few things that you need to do before you start putting these together. So the first one, of course, is to open the bag and get your resin miniatures out of the bag. Now you'll notice that a lot of these miniatures will be mounted onto this section here. This is just part of how they produce the miniatures. Keep all of these because these potentially could be quite useful, maybe to make some little barricades or other pieces of terrain. However, what we need to do is we need to make sure that what's in the instruction book, the bits that we actually are supposed to get with it, are actually in the packet. So the instruction book gives you pictures of all the parts and they're numbered, and then down the side here it tells you what the part is called and how many of them you should have. So make sure you've got all the correct parts. If you do have something missing or potentially broken, then just contact Forge World, give them an email. They're a very good company. They'll just send you a replacement part. Now some of the pieces, not necessarily on this particular kit, but some other kits, you may find that the resin will be bent. Now because it's resin, we're able to reshape it using hot water or maybe a hairdryer. So don't worry too much if you have some bent bits. The main thing is that you have nothing which is snapped that can't be glued back together, or indeed you've got missing parts. Okay, so here are all my bits. I've got the correct quantities of everything. However, I did buy mine second hand rather than direct from Forge World. I've got a few extra sort of breakages, let's say. There's a couple of claws which have broken there, and this one, the very front tip of this claw is missing, so I'm going to have to probably green stuff that. These should easily glue back into position, so I'm not too worried about that. However, if I bought these direct from Forge World, I would definitely be emailing them saying I've got these broken bits and this one has broken off here, and I'm sure they would replace it. Right, so now we know we've got all of the bits. The next thing to do is wash these, because when they make resin they use a substance called mold release, which basically is like an oily stuff which goes onto the resin so that it releases from the mold. Now if you don't wash that mold release off, when it comes to painting, your paint just won't stick. Sometimes you can get the residue leaking after you've painted it, so we need to give these a good wash. Now I use warm soapy water. I tend to put hand soap in there and a bit of washing up liquid, and then I will leave that to soak for a good 24 hours. During that time I will go in and I will scrub them gently with a small toothbrush 2 or 3 times, just to really try and get the mold release off of the miniatures. And then once I've done that, I'll soak them for a few hours in some clean water with no soap in them. Again, I'll give them one last scrub, then I'll put them on a towel and I will let them fully dry for another 24 hours. You want to make sure that the resin is washed and dried before you work on it. Okay, there you go. This has all been washed, it's been scrubbed, it's been dried, and now it's ready to start building. Now the thing to bear in mind when you're using resin models is it's quite dangerous to breathe in the particles. So ideally, when you're working with resin, you want to wear a face mask. Other than that, it's going to clean up pretty much like any other material that we use. So you could use clippers to clip off the main sections, and then you could use a knife and a little file just to clean up any of the excess resin and also any of the mould lines. So I'm going to clean up first of all the three main parts, that's the bodies, and then I'll be back. Okay, so that's the three bodies done. Now one thing to note here, with your mask on you can't blow the dust away as you're working on them, so it's a good idea to have an old toothbrush handy, and then as you do any filing you can use this just to get rid of the surplus dust. Now looking at the instruction book for these bodies, we've got a number by each one, and if you have a look at the coding along here you've got body 1, 2 and 3. It's very easy to work out which body is which just from the shape. However, the next stage is this little carapace section here which goes on the top of the body, and if you turn it over this way it indicates which carapace goes on which body, so 1, 2 and 3. Now the actual resin sections which the carapaces come on doesn't actually have a number like sometimes they do. However, there is a number on the inside of this carapace and it's marked with a little tiny hole. So 1 hole, 2 holes and then 3 holes on the various ones. And then if you have a closer look at the body itself, there's a little hole exactly where these pieces go. 1 hole on there, and then this one's got 2 holes and this one's got 3 holes. So you can easily match up which carapace goes with which body. Now I'm going to use super glue to glue these together. It's the perfect glue. It glues very quickly and it gives a nice strong bond. So I'm going to glue those carapaces on, and then I'm going to clean up the heads, the tails and the guns. These seem to be the easiest parts to do next. I'm going to leave all of the limbs to the end, but first I'm going to clean up these. Okay, so that's the carapace glued onto the bodies, and I've cleaned up the heads, the guns and also the tails. Now my tails are slightly bent here, which is fairly common with resin to be fair, especially these little thin bits. Now if it was a thick bit of resin I would heat it up with a hairdryer and then just bend it into position and let it cool down. However, it's quite thin and fragile, so instead I'm going to place it into some hot water, not boiling water, just hot. Once it's warmed up enough that I can bend it, I will bend it and then I will run it under the cold water tap so that it cools down, and then it should be in the correct position. So I'm going to straighten them up, and actually I'm not going to glue them onto the body yet. I want to see what the pose looks like before I decide on the angle, because the tails can be glued onto the model at any angle because of this little ball socket. So that's the tails. Now their heads, once again, I could glue these in at a particular angle, so I'm going to see what the pose is like before I decide which angle I glue them into, and then I need to add the little mandibles to the bottom as well, so some more work needed on the heads. So I'm going to glue the guns in. However, even though you've got a tiny little slot where it actually positions into place, it's still pretty loose. Now I'm sure you could probably just super glue it in, it would be fine. However, I'm going to use a tiny bit of green stuff in this hole first. Then I'm going to put some super glue onto this end and then push it into the correct position. Make sure it's straight and then let it dry. Now whilst I've got the green stuff out, I'm also going to green stuff a magnet into this hole. Now I've previously made videos on green stuff and magnets in my Back to Basics series of videos, so I'll link those 2 videos up for you in the description below. Check out the whole series, especially if you're new to the hobby, because you might find it very useful. So I've got my green stuff made up. I'm literally going to put some of this into the hole where the magnet is going to go. I'm going to use these N52 magnets. They're very strong, and these are 3 by 2 millimeters. So I'm just going to super glue these into the holes, making sure that they're the right way for my stands. I like to have all of my flying bases with the magnets the same way, so it doesn't matter which model I pick up, it will fit on any of my flying bases. It's very useful to do that. So I'm just going to get that all done and we'll come back. Okay, so that's all done. So I've now glued in the magnet, I've glued the gun on, and I've straightened up these little towel sections. So next I'm going to work on the flight pinions, which are these pieces here. Now apparently there's 12 in total. There's 6 large ones and 6 small ones, and they're on 3 sprues. So just a note, this one sprue here has 2 small ones and 2 big ones. So next I'm just going to cut them off of the sprue and clean them up. Okay, so that's those bits all cleaned up. I have to say that was the hardest of the cleanups so far. They're quite fiddly, and to be honest with you, I did actually break one of them during the cleanup. However, I just glued it back together with some super glue and it was fine. The Forge World resin is quite easy to glue together, even with small contact points. So the instruction book indicates that the long stabilizer goes at the front and the short one goes at the back. And when you look at the stabilizer, there's a big ball on one end like an orb, and that's got to be facing outwards, and it goes downwards, so it comes out and downwards. It doesn't really tell you in the instruction book, all you've got is a picture. But yeah, the front one is the long one, and then the short one goes on the hole just behind it. Having said all of that, personally, I don't like these stabilizers. And you may or may not be aware, but I previously converted some Acanthrites from some old school metal wraiths. Let me just get these out of the way and I'll bring this one in. Here we go. So this is my conversion of an Acanthrites, and it's a metal one, and you can see I've just changed everything. And one thing which I really didn't like about this particular model was the stabilizers, so I didn't actually put them on. I've got the matching orb at the back there, and then I used these 2 little orbs as my stabilizers, sort of making the model more sleek, like an actual wraith is. Notably, my gun is quite big compared to the gun on these original models, but you know, whatever. So I was thinking of converting this guy up as well to match my Acanthrites, which I've already done. So I'm thinking I will cut the orb off, and as opposed to having this long spindly thing, just have the orb into the hole, and then it will match my original design. So I think that's what I'm going to do, but if you're going to build them normally, then just super glue these into the appropriate holes. Okay, so that is all done, and I have to say I'm really happy with the end results. I know I cleaned up these bits before I decided to do the conversion, so I did waste my time, but I'm still very happy with how they're looking, a lot more sleeker. Now just for reference, in case you want to do this conversion, is I did cut the balls off leaving a stem, so I didn't actually cut them off right where the ball is. There's a little stem enabling me to glue them into position a bit easier. So that's all done. We are now on to the claws. Now each of these sets of claws actually has a letter on there, so you've got A, B and C, and then we've got leg A, B and C for Model 1, for Model 2 and Model 3. So it seems like this is for Model 1 at the top, Model 2, Model 3. Now my initial thoughts were that the small claws go at the front, these are the middle claws and these are the back claws. But I think what they've done is to try to make the models all look different, is they've given you sort of smaller claws here, and then you've got these extended claws at the back. So one model will be totally extended, one will be shorter. I suppose arguably you could just glue these however you want, but I'm just going to keep a note of which set of claws go with which model when I clean them up. Okay, so that's all the claws cleaned up, and I've actually placed them in order as on the instruction book, so I know exactly which claws are which. Now the claws at the bottom of the sprues are the ones that I had to fix, mainly just gluing them back together because I had a few broken ones, so I just glued them with super glue. They glued absolutely fine. I did have to reshape some of them with, again, hot water, just bending them into position, and then cold water to set them into position. Now I did have one which had a missing front section. I couldn't find it anywhere. I don't know if I had it and lost it or if it just wasn't there. But I have fixed it. So what I did is I used the end piece of a whip coil. I reshaped it so that it matched the end of the claw, and then I just super glued it into position. I'm really happy how it looks. It's not exactly the same as the original, but it's not far off. When it's all painted, you're not going to see the difference. So I am now ready to glue these all on. I'm going to glue them on as per the instruction book, so front, middle, back legs of model 1 and then model 2, model 3. Again, I'm just going to use super glue to do that. Okay, so that's all the legs glued on. I try to make them have different poses, taking into consideration their heads. So this one I'm going to have the head facing forward, and he's got this sort of more sleek going forward design. This one, the head is going to be going to the left, and this one with the claws facing in different directions, he's got the biggest swing on his tail and he's going to be facing the right. So that is the claws all done, or the legs. Next up I'm going to do the heads and tails. I've got these little mandibles to clip off and clean up. I'm going to glue those to the heads, which obviously I've previously cleaned up. Then I'm going to glue the heads and the tails to match the poses on the models. Okay, so I glued the tails on, I've glued the mandibles onto the head, and I've glued the heads onto the bodies using super glue for all of it. Now I'm just showing you the models on my magnetised flying bases. The models do actually come with ball and socket flying bases, so you could just glue them if you wanted to. However, I find for storage purposes it's best to have them magnetised, and also when you're playing on the battlefield, if somebody accidentally knocks the model, well, there's less chance of it breaking. And I have to say, with the conversions that I've done to the stabilisers, which is the piece that I don't like about this model, I think these look super cool and super slick. I'm really liking that conversion. I think it changes the model totally. And when I compare the conversions that I did to the old metal wraiths, bearing in mind that I converted them just from pictures, well, I think they actually match in really well. I think as a unit it's going to fit together quite nicely. I'm looking forward to painting these and then playing them on the table. I'm starting to think I might want another 3 just to fill the unit out to 9. Now of course I'll be uploading the battle reports to the channel, so make sure you stay tuned for that. In the meantime, if you want to see my Acanthrite conversion work, here is a playlist with all of the videos in. And if you want to find out how to magnetise flying bases, well, here's a video I made on that. Beam me up!